Welcome to the 10th episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. Today we will be talking about the otters of India and the threats they face. Joining us today is Vinni Jain. She is a research fellow at the Center for Wildlife Studies based in Bengaluru. She spent the last few years studying otters in the Palakkad district of Madhya Pradesh near Khana Tiger Reserve. I had the good fortune of volunteering for fieldwork during this project, which included occupancy surveys and camera traps. So now we will talk about a bit of this work today.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question is, what got you interested in otters?
So I became very interested in otters in around 2018, 2017, 2018. It was a very random thing actually. My friend and I had wanted to do an internship, like a field-based internship in the northern Western Ghats. And the organization that we were working with gave us a couple of options for what we could do our internship on. So they gave us options like you can work on hornbills or you can work on jungle cats and small cats, and they gave us the option of otters because the organization had seen otters in the landscape surrounding landscape. And like they had just seen them, and there was no information as such in the literature about otters being there or anything. It was just them seeing it and local people telling them that there's otters here. So they were like, this is like someone needs to work on this. So if you want, this is also an option. So my friend and I chose otters because we were very like, we thought it was very interesting. And I for example didn't even know that India has otters in tropical forests. So when we started working on them, the idea was just to get baseline distribution data because there was none. And so we just started surveying the rivers for otter signs. So we were looking for like sprains, which is their poop. We were looking for signs such as tracks and sprains, and we also set up some camera traps. So I think it was a combination of things that got me so interested in them. First of all, this was like my first experience doing fieldwork in India, like proper fieldwork. And it was just so exciting. Every time we found an otter sign, it was like, oh wow, it was like solving a mystery. And then when we would get videos of otters at night, or when we got our first video on otters swimming in the river, it was just so exhilarating. So that was anyways, um, that was wonderful. But also I was shocked to see how much they were interacting with people. So we were talking to a lot of fishermen and their families in the area, and many people were like, "Oh, we see them every day. Otters come and take fish from my net every day, and they come and surround me and they swim. I'm so like frustrated because they are so smart and they're so clever, and they've made my life so difficult." And many of them were telling us such fascinating stories about their interactions with otters on a daily basis. And also the rivers that we were working in were so dirty in some places. There was so much trash, so much pollution. It was so heavily like you could never even think that this is there's going to be otters swimming through these rivers, but there were. And we got evidence of them living in possibly even thriving in those rivers. So it was I was amazed to see how closely people were living with wildlife, and I was amazed to see how wildlife was adapting to these human environments. And this was just a short 2-month internship, so I my thirst for information was not at all satiated. And so when I start one like when further in my career, when I had the chance to start my own project, I knew that I wanted to look more closely at otters in human environments and how they interact with local people. And I was also amazed that, oh, there's otters and there's no baseline data. So I was very interested in, developing that baseline data in other parts of India.
How many species of otters are there in India and where are they found?
We have three species of otters that we know of. So there's smooth coated otters, which smooth coated and small clawed otters we have, and these are found across Southeast Asia. They're very well adapted to like tropical rivers, and they coexist in all parts of Asia with other carnivores like elephants, tigers, muggers, which are crocodiles. And so you get smooth coated otters even in Singapore, you'll get them in Thailand, in Indonesia, I think so. And so we have them across the Indian subcontinent as well. And smooth coated otters are also very like they can adapt to a variety of habitats. So you'll find them in mangroves and in like estuaries, and you'll also find them in like big rivers, and then you'll also find them in dry areas. So, for example, the Deccan has smooth coated otters, and even the dry parts of Gujarat has smooth coated otters. Small clawed otters are also found across Southeast Asia, but they're a lot more habitat specific. So they're found more in hilly areas and smaller streams, and they eat crustaceans more than they eat fish. So they have different ways of fishing, of hunting as well, when compared to smooth coated otters, and their webbing, claws, and mouth are slightly different because they're more adapted to picking shells and eating crustaceans than just catching fish. Uh, smo- uh, so, like I said, small clawed otters you'll find more in hilly areas. So you'll find them in the Western Ghats. You'll find them in the Himalayas, Northeast India. I'm not sure that we have small clawed otters in Central India, but Central India has not been explored enough. So I would say that probably there are small clawed otters even in the hilly parts of Central India. We also have Eurasian otters. They are the most mysterious of the three because Eurasian otters are technically found across Europe and Asia, and even in parts of Africa. The Eurasian otters in India though are very different from the European counterparts, and they're also very widely distributed in India, but somehow so elusive that we just don't know. And every year in India now you'll find new records of Eurasian otters being spotted from areas where they were considered absent. So they're a very like mysterious kind of species, at least in India. Even in my research, what we found was that where I worked, which is Balaghat near Kanha National Park, Balaghat is a district of Madhya Pradesh. It's seems to be fully dominated by Eurasian otters, and that was not people just nobody even knew that. People thought Eurasian otters are extinct from Central India. So yeah, those are the three species that we have.
Spoke about your research in Balaghat. Could you elaborate a bit on that? And why do you specifically choose Balaghat district?
So my research was focused in so Balaghat has a river that runs through it called the Wainganga. So I focused on the Wainganga and all of the rivers eastwards of the Wainganga up to Kanha National Park, and this is all in Balaghat district. And the reason that I chose Central India is because I am from Central India and I know the language, and so that makes it easier to understand the context, to understand what people are saying, and to interact with people. And also because Central India has had recent reports of Eurasian otters from Satpura and from Balaghat and from all of these areas. So, further work definitely needs to be done because the previous records of Eurasian otters were just accidental. People were camera trapping for tigers and they just happened to see Eurasian otters. So in seeing that, I found that very interesting. And so I thought, why not do a landscape level study just on otters, because that's never been done before in that area. And clearly there's Eurasian otters there, and who knows, there might be like other species as well. So that was the question that I went with going in. So the questions I had were, what are there otters across this landscape? What species are there? What's their distribution? And also, what is the relationship with local people and the interactions with local people? And I fully focused on areas outside Kanha National Park because the point was to study human modified landscapes rather than protected areas where there's no people.
How do you plan and conduct your occupancy surveys?
So the planning this was a very the planning phase was very complicated because I got my grant to study otters in 2020, and that was right during the pandemic. So I got the money in the midst of the pandemic, and we wanted to do a recce, which is to go to Balaghat and just kind of understand the people and the landscape before we make a concrete plan. But we couldn't do a recce because interstate travel was completely shut and things were so uncertain all the time. I was only able to actually go to field in September when things started easing up a bit. Interstate travel started again, and as soon as interstate travel opened, we requested Rafford to give us the money, and we went to field. But that was like the first time we went was when the project started, and that was the first time I had even seen the landscape. So a lot of the planning was done in Bangalore, and then a lot of it changed when we actually went there and saw the area. And the planning we did using, like, we decided to, all occupancy surveys are planned based on how many people you have, how much money you have, and what kind of intensity of survey effort you can put, and what your questions are. So keeping all of these things in mind, we decided on a framework where we did transects of 5 kilometers along streams with gaps of 3 kilometers between them. So we mapped out all of the rivers and we sampled 5 kilometers at a time. And this was done based on logistical, considerations. That's how we planned it, and also post collection of data, how we would statistically analyze it. All of these things were considered, and like the framework we came up with was 5 kilometers of river being sampled, and with gaps of 3 kilometers in between. And along each 5 kilometer transect, we would put a camera trap as well, just to try and see what species is there. For the interviews with people, we used a grid framework. So we divided the study area into grids, and within each grid, we wanted to do like 3 to 5 interviews or like questionnaire surveys to get like an even spatial coverage across the landscape.
What were the main threats you noticed which the otters faced in your study area?
So the threats are many. I would say one of the primary threats is definitely the fact that the rivers are clearly declining in quality because of, like, the overarching problem is climate change, and then changes in rainfall patterns, which cause rivers to either overflow or to not have enough water. And then many of the perennial streams become seasonal because of these things. And a lot of the local villages and larger towns and cities extract water from the rivers. So, the water levels keep changing. So the health of the stream system is declining every year. There's also a lot of mining that happens in the Balaghat region, and this area borders Chhattisgarh and Maharashtra. So on the Chhattisgarh side and Balaghat side, there's a lot of mining, and the chemicals from the mines leak out into the streams. This is something that a lot of local people told us as well. Also, there's a lot of fishing that happens. There's a lot of overfishing that happens, leading to, over time, decrease in fish populations and changes, and it affects their breeding, it affects their movement. Another problem that we noticed, which is specific to Balaghat, is that people, a source of income for a lot of people is that they either take natural lakes or they create artificial lakes, and they put like fish eggs in the lakes, like exotic fish species, and cultivate fish. So there's fish farming that's happening. And so these are all species which are not native, right, to the area, or, like all of the commercial species like rohu, katla, whatever. They cultivate them and sell them in markets. And a lot of these species are taking over the more native and smaller species of fish that are actually belong to the rivers. And so that's also one huge problem. And then there's a lot of like pollution, sewage, chemicals, pesticides, all of these things that affect the health of the rivers. There's also we saw a lot of sand mining, legal and illegal both, that happens, and sand mining is terrible for riparian ecosystems. The forest parts, the rivers are still healthier, but where the rivers are flowing through villages or towns, they're just in terrible condition. So habitat degradation, habitat loss, I would say, are the primary, and prey depletion are the primary threats.
So, what were the outcomes of your social survey?
Sorry, I would also like to add another threat, which is people eat otters. So this is a very sensitive question. We included this question in our survey. We asked people, have you ever killed an otter, or do you eat them? Do you hunt them? And the problem with asking these kind of questions is that you don't get accurate numbers, because many people will not tell you the truth. So despite the fact that this is a sensitive question and most people would hide this from us, and because we didn't have any tools, there are specific ways that you can extract this kind of information, but we did not use those. But despite that, we still got many reports of people admitting that, yes, I've killed them or that I've eaten them. So I think that's also one potential threat, the scale of which I can't tell you, but it is something that needs to be looked into.
So,
because otters are protected species, but they are being eaten
yeah.
there.
So that leads to my next question. So what was some of the outcomes of your social survey?
So the social surveys were done with we interviewed anyone who could identify otters based on images that we showed them. And our main questions were like, how often do you see them? When you see them, what was your experience? What did the otter look like? What happened? What was the interaction like? And then we also asked them whether they faced any positive or negative impacts in their lives due to the presence of otters, and what their opinion was, what their attitudes were. We had three attitude questions which we measured on a scale. So like we would make a statement and then the respondent would say like, I strongly agree, or I agree, or I'm neutral, disagree, like a scale like that. And we also asked people about like killing, hunting, and all of that. So the results were very interesting because many people reported seeing otters in and around their village. And there were many fishers who we spoke to who see them very frequently, even though the species in the landscape are most likely Eurasian otters, which are nocturnal. They don't roam around in groups. Even then, people see them quite frequently. What we found was that fishers in the area face losses because of otters, because they come and eat the fish, they rip up the nets, but the losses are not that much for fishers who are more like traditional fishers. So they basically catch fish for sustenance and they take the extra fish and they sell it in the local like village market. So for them, losing fish to otters or losing a couple of nets, many of them said it's not a huge loss. It's not that much of a big deal to us. But for people who cultivate fish, who grow commercial fish species, and who are who have larger scale setups, for them they face much larger losses, and they're more affected by these losses in terms of like the way they speak about otters. They are more they have more negative perceptions. We also found that perceptions were very much driven by things like occupation. So, fishers were much more likely to give negative answers to the attitude questions than other people. Education, people who are more educated were more likely to give positive responses, and people who live closer to protected areas, like closer to Kanha National Park, were more likely to give negative responses because I think they generally face a lot of conflict with tigers, with leopards. They face like livestock loss and crop damage. So they already have so much frustration. So, I mean, that's the assumption here. But yeah, we found that distance to protected areas was also a factor which affected how people responded to the attitude questions. Um, we also found people reporting a lot of positive impacts due to otters. So people said, oh, like I love seeing otters. It makes me very happy. And I think they're very cute. So we got like a scale of responses. So the social science research that we did was to look at, how how attitudes and responses change due to things like education, occupation, income, and stuff like that.
Great. So moving on more towards the importance of otters in the freshwater ecosystem. So why are they so crucial to freshwater ecosystems?
So like any carnivore, they are at the top of their respective food chain. So they exert a lot of influence on prey populations. So because they consume, for example, a Eurasian otter living in a stream will consume such large amounts of fish that they exert a lot of influence on the fish populations. So removing an otter from that landscape, for example, could have a lot of cascading effects on the freshwater ecosystem in terms of the fish, the species of fish, the composition of fish, and then whatever the fish feed on. So an example of this is sea otters. So marine otters, they did research, I think around Scotland or somewhere, where they found that in areas where there's no otters, sea urchin populations explode because there's no otters to prey on them, which leads to less like seagrass and kelp, which leads to a loss of like a lot of carbon capture that kelp does. So there's removing a top predator from an ecosystem has a lot of cascading impacts. Also, otters are like indicators of healthy rivers. So if they're there, that means that there's fish, there's enough food for them to feed. That means that the river is still relatively healthy. So yeah, they're important. They're also in a way ecosystem engineers, and they do a lot of nutrient cycling. So when they consume fish or other crustaceans from the river and they come out and then outside, they transfer nutrients from water to the terrestrial ecosystem.
And what were some challenges you faced while studying the otters in Balaghat?
There were some very interesting challenges. So the first and most important challenge is that Eurasian otters are extremely elusive. So even though we worked there for 6 months, we didn't see a single otter. We only saw them on camera traps. They're so elusive that even the camera traps that we set up cameras for 30 days at a time. Most cameras gave us no images, even though we could see signs in and around the camera trap. We could not get that many images. So this could be either because that Eurasian otters are very few in number, even though they're widespread, they're few in number, or it could be that the cameras that we had were disturbing them too much. So we couldn't see them, and our capture rate on the camera traps was very low. So that was one challenge. Another challenge was that Balaghat is a very Naxal prone area. So, for example, my aim was to cover the landscape till the Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh borders, but I had to cut out half of the study area because it's completely like Naxal dominated. And even some parts of my study area that I finally did decide on, we had to leave out certain parts of it because of Naxal movement. We also had to take a lot of precautions on field to ensure like safety for ourselves and our volunteers because of Naxal movement. And other challenges include, you know, normal. I mean, COVID was a big challenge. So me and many other people in my team got COVID when we were on field. So that was not fun, but yeah, it was also we recovered eventually. So, and because of COVID, we had to take a lot of precautions like wearing masks, and you know, we had to make sure that we are not, you know, like taking COVID around in the villages as we go from village to village. So we had face shields, we had face masks, and all of those kinds of things.
My final question for you is that how was your experience of speaking at SCCS in New York and winning the Best Talk Award for your research?
The talk was a virtual talk, so the experience was basically me making a pre-recorded presentation and submitting it. But I'm very glad that the award went to my study because it's a very like otters are not something that and otters in India is not something that is very like mainstream. So I'm really glad that such an understudied and not so well known animal got so much attention at a conference like that, and also that landscape like Central India was able to get so much attention. And I'm glad that the people who reviewed my presentation appreciated the interdisciplinary kind of work, because there was interviews as well as ecological data collection that was happening. So I'm very glad.
So that was my final question. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on whichever platform you are listening to the episode.